Today we'll be diving into the lore of Resident Evil Village with the backstory of the mysterious matriarch of the tale, Mother Miranda herself. Mother Miranda, or just Miranda, before she became the leader of a cult, began her life with the same modest upbringing that you can imagine most people of a secluded mountain village had in the late 1800s. From her early years to her adulthood, she seemingly led an average life from what we're able to understand from the information, or rather lack thereof within the game. From what is gatherable, time passes up until the birth of her daughter Ava in 1909. While Ava clearly had a father, they are nowhere to be found within any of Miranda's writings or musings. What is clear, however, is that Ava is the absolute center of Miranda's universe. This fact only makes the next major event in Miranda's life all the more devastating. The Spanish flu washes over the mountainous village in the year 1919 and left nothing but misery and death in its wake. As the virus finally receded from the area, it left the village's cemetery with a body count far beyond its capacity, and its remaining populace with nothing but tears filled with the memories of their loved ones. Perhaps no one more than Miranda herself, who lost her beloved Ava. At 10 years old, she was clearly taken too soon from the world, and Miranda was hopelessly lost in her sadness and grief. Miranda only saw one way out of the depths of her sorrow, and so she departed to a nearby cave to bring it all to a close. When Miranda entered the damp cavern, she believed, hoped even, that this would be the end. Perhaps indeed it was, but it was also the beginning of something truly abominable. As Miranda found herself standing in the hallowed earth beneath the village, she stumbled across something that would forever change not only herself or even the village, but the future of the entire planet. In the murky depths of her despair, she had discovered the mold, a beyond ancient colony of fungus whose name she coined herself. With an uncertain hand trembling from grief, she reached out and touched its dark, damp surface. When her fingertips met with the flesh of the fungi, a whole new world was opened to her. A doorway burst open in her mind, and out of it poured the memories and knowledge of the thousands of people who have been laid to rest in these soils and assimilated. Among the garbled mess of these images and voices in her mind, she saw friends, others in the community who were taken by the flu. Even her beloved daughter's essence was present, and the very realization will be the catalyst that sets the rest of the events in the Resident Evil franchise into motion. Miranda, from that point forward, believed it would be possible to bring her daughter back to life through this organism. Miranda died that day, at least the person she was. The woman that left that cave was no longer a grieving parent, but something else entirely. Grief became unyielding purpose. Miranda had been reborn. Miranda, now proclaiming herself as the prophet of the Black God, wasted no time setting her newly conceived plot into motion. Certainly, as the village was devoted to the teachings of Christianity, her new demeanor was likely met with resistance. However, when she began curing those who were still quite sick with the flu, it was probably seen as miraculous. Of course, it didn't hurt that those she cured all began to convert to her teachings as they were now infected with the mold instead of influenza, and as such had their minds open to direct influence from Miranda. Before long, the entire village had become converts, leaving their Christian faith behind due to the mind-altering effects of the mold growing in their bodies. Mother Miranda, as they now called her, served as matriarch and prophet in their eyes and would protect them from harm. Unfortunately for them, their fates were all sealed. Miranda saw them as nothing more than fodder for her upcoming experiments, stepping stones on her path to bring her daughter back to life. Test subjects were needed from all walks of life, from peasant to nobility. Experimentation was required. The following months and years saw Miranda divide her time amongst a number of tests with the mold. Of these different lines of experimentation, the subject that garnered the most success was the Cadeau. The Cadeau, or gift in Romanian, were parasitic nematoids that were assimilated and mutated by the mold, reproducing thereafter. These worm-like organisms became round and swollen post-mutation, and were then implanted in Miranda's test subjects. The Cadeau caused a wide range of effects on their host, depending on their genetic affinity or compatibility with the parasite and the mold as a whole. Frankly, the Cadeau is a book of information all on its own. For Mother Miranda, her experiments with the Cadeau largely ended in failures, often leading to an individual with low affinity mutating into a near mindless monster depending on a number of factors. We'll discuss these experiments further in a future video, as the results for villager experimentation are far-reaching to say the least, and involve input from the four lords of the village. Speaking of nobility, the descendants of the four ancient houses were prime candidates for Miranda's research, and were also targeted early on after the development of the Cadeau. Although not explicitly stated in the game, it may be safe to assume that Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, Salvatore Moreau, and Karl Heisenberg were not the only descendants of their respective families that were experimented upon. One piece of evidence for this is the fact that Miranda had to seek out Alcina and lure her back to the village sometime after the Second World War. Castle Dimitrescu was seemingly without a caretaker upon her arrival, and uptake of residents within its high walls. These four, however, were without question the only members of their bloodlines that had a high level of success with their Cadeau implantation, with nearly a half-century devoted to testing and research to bring back her deceased daughter. Miranda had still not acquired desirable results. The Lords were all successful experiments in their own right, but each one unfortunately has some major flaw in their being that would prevent them from being a viable host for her daughter. Even Heisenberg, whose affinity to the Godot turned out to be amazing, was ultimately unfit for this role. Miranda's line of devoted experimentation would of course continue for another half-century, but it's at this point where her quest would truly change the world of Resident Evil forever. During the 1950s, a young university student by the name of Oswald Spencer was on a hiking trip through the mountains of Eastern Europe. Unfortunately for the future of mankind, Spencer lost his way on the snow-covered roads of the tundra. Miranda found this young man and decided to take this medical student under her wing. See what I did there? As her student, Miranda opened Spencer's mind to the idea of using an organism to effect a change in the human body, to force a mutation. Evolution, Spencer would call it in his own twisted words. She taught him everything she had discovered of the mold, the Godot, and every resulting mutation they force in their hosts. Now, this is where things get interesting, because Miranda's story here is changing the very history of Resident Evil itself. Spencer, finding his ultimate goal differing from Miranda's vastly, departs from the village without so much as a farewell. Years later, however, he does write to his cherished teacher to explain his reasoning, as well as to apologize. Spencer's letter to Miranda reads as follows: Dear Miranda, my deepest apologies for not meeting you in person. I would love nothing more than to visit your quaint village once more. However, I am incredibly busy. Then again, I suppose for an immortal woman such as yourself, you no longer remember this poor, half-dead medical student in the snow. I've always cherished the revelations I came to 15 years ago when I stayed in your village. I was inspired by your research, to think one could transform a human by infecting them with an organism. Positively visionary. I know with that knowledge I could achieve my own vision for the next step in human evolution. Even after 2 world wars, and humanity on the cusp of another, my conviction never wavered. I realized, however, through the many nights of intellectual talks you and I shared, that your conviction differed from mine. You hoped to bring back a single dead person, while I aimed to change the world. Your experiments on the mold would not have aided me in my endeavor to achieve an exponential infection. I thought a virus would be more effective. This is why, my dear, I had to leave you. I will regret never telling you goodbye. My apologies for reminiscing. I actually have news that I thought might please you. I have found the key to evolution, the progenitor, a virus found in Africa. I plan to start a company with friends and colleagues dedicated to the virus's research. I will call it Umbrella, just like the symbol in the cave that we spoke about. I am one step closer to making my vision a reality. I hope you will be able to achieve your goal someday too. You taught me so much, and for that, I will be forever in your debt. Sincerely, your lifelong student, Oswald E. Spencer. Up until this point in the franchise, it was believed that Spencer himself was the root of the emergence of bioweapons. However, with this new revelation positioning Miranda as the origin, we have to ask, what other relationships to past games did Miranda retroactively have? Breaking from the story of Miranda herself for a moment, we know that Resident Evil 4 is currently being remade, and the rumor being heard by and large is that Capcom is making certain that it is not a one-to-one remake of the original, which means there are going to be some changes afoot. Time to put on our tinfoil hats for a second as we take a look at some similarities Resident Evil 4 currently has with Village. Resident Evil 4. Snarky protagonist? Check. Deranged maniac leading a cult of villagers infected by a parasite? Check. Honestly, it goes without saying that I think we'll see some lore of Resident Evil Village being added into the remake of 4 when it's ultimately released. Sadler has many parallels that can be drawn to Miranda with how he controls the masses through Las Plagas, which frankly itself could have a connection to the mold and Godot given its effects on the hosts. We've seen other similarities with other BOWs such as the Tyrant and Lady Dimitrescu, whose research notes from Miranda detail her highly aggressive regenerative properties, something mirrored by the Tyrant program and sought after in the development of the T-Virus, or Tyrant virus respectively. Also noted, of course, is the fear of uncontrollable mutation if these abilities aren't regulated properly, which is something else we can see simply from the Tyrant's grotesque appearance. Is it possible that Sadler was originally from the village itself in this new canon? Los Illuminados in the old canon was an organization operating in an isolated Spanish region, and Osmond Sadler is not a name of Spanish heritage. This clearly paints Sadler as an outsider who came to power in this organization. But where did he come from? This is unknown, and equally mysterious is how he even discovered Las Plagas. Las Plagas itself is a parasitic arthropod found in, wait for it, a remote mountainous region of Spain. I guess we can add another checkmark to the list of similarities under the item mind-altering parasite found in the remote rural lands of Europe. Could Las Plagas be another parasite that was simply assimilated and mutated by the mold, similar to the Godot of Miranda's experiments? Hang on to your butts because the tinfoil theories don't stop here. Next stop, Wesker. You might ask yourself what connections the series' most beloved, deceased probably, antagonist has with Mother Miranda. With a new pre-timeline event being established, it's quite possible that Wesker will eventually know everything with regard to Spencer's time spent with her in the village. I imagine if we continue down this path of remakes, alongside the continuation of the franchise as a whole, we will eventually arrive at the Resident Evil 5 remake. Now currently, there is a bit more lore available to tangentially tie Wesker to the events of at least Resident Evil 7. The Dolby incident in Louisiana came to be after a group known as the Connections came in contact with Miranda. The Connections are a competitor to the Umbrella Corporation, and were led, at least by one point, by Brandon Bailey, who himself was a former Umbrella researcher based in Africa studying the progenitor virus. Bailey's status is currently unknown, and may very well be deceased. However, the primary question here is how the organization found out about Miranda at all. It's possible that Bailey had information, but this is unlikely due to how closely Spencer guarded his secrets. More likely is the info was given to them by their partner in this endeavor, the HCF, who was under the leadership of none other than Albert Wesker himself. Although the incident in Louisiana happened in 2017, the research that led to this occurrence was conducted in the early to mid-2000s. This roughly overlaps with the events of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, which means Wesker would have been alive, and presumably aware of the happenings of his own organization. This would, in turn, paint a picture of Wesker being fully aware of Miranda, the mold, and her teachings of Oswald Spencer. Now, I reiterate that a lot of this reading between the lines is pure speculation at this point, as we don't know the details and simply won't know until Capcom moves forward in the series. But it's certainly interesting to see the possibilities of the interwoven stories that this new canon presents us, outside of the events of Resident Evil 4 and 5 being completely changed in their upcoming and potential remakes. Could we see Albert Wesker resurrected? The mold certainly has the capacity to do so if we are to believe all of Mother Miranda's efforts, but we just don't know all of its limits. Does a body need to be fully assimilated, or does simply making contact present enough data to the organism to later bring back someone from the void? So many potential, interesting questions with no answers, especially considering the BSAA are now using BOWs to undertake missions. That's right, Chris Redfield's own former organization, hypocritically using the very weapons they were created to destroy. The big kicker is that they all look like Chris. Again, no confirmation here, just speculation as Capcom has not revealed the true nature of these bioweapons being used. But doesn't that sound like a twisted Wesker plot to get revenge on his nemesis? Exciting musings and speculations aside, let's head back to the facts in the core of Miranda's story, the present day. After nearly a century of testing the limits of the mold on her devoted villagers, Miranda, as mentioned previously, was approached by an outside organization called the Connections, who offered their assistance in Miranda's goals. Miranda at this point accepted their offer and provided this group of samples of both the mold organism and Eva's DNA sequence. Miranda herself even went on to join their research team with the hopes that this joint venture would finally see the resurrection of her daughter brought to fruition. The Connections, working with both Miranda and the HCF, had the goal of using their research to not only help Miranda complete her life's work, but to engineer weapons that could use mind-controlling properties of the mold to control a battlefield or very well take over an entire region without the need for conflict altogether. Their testing of the so-called E-types, child bioweapons who would be in control of the mold infectees, came to a head in 2014, with the first successful creation of the E001, Evelyn. Miranda met Evelyn as well as her handlers, Alan Droney and Mia Winters, during this time. However, the project had fallen under pressure due to hostile outside organizations either aiming to steal the specimen for their own gain, or, in the case of the BSAA, put the project in the grave. Evelyn was thus put aboard a ship with her handlers and transported across the Atlantic, where it crashed in the Gulf of Mexico, off the coast of Louisiana. This joint effort between Miranda and the Connections was almost another dead end in her endeavors. However, a few years later, she received a tip from the Connections, information regarding the incident as a whole. In 2021, Miranda discovered the birth of Rosemary Winters, a girl born from Mia and Ethan Winters, who had both been infected by Evelyn. This was the break, the one she was waiting for, the perfect vessel. Resident Evil 8 sees Miranda, to execute the final steps of her century-long journey, abduct and replace Mia Winters with herself. One of the abilities granted to Miranda by the mold was, of course, perfect mimicry of an individual. The setup could not have been more perfect either, as the family had just relocated to Europe after the incident in Louisiana. However, the first wrench in the plan appeared when Chris Redfield stormed their family home, in an effort to kill her and take Ethan and Rose into protective custody. This all fell apart on the road when Miranda, possibly still disguised as Mia, rose from the dead and killed the protective detail. The truck was crashed on the side of the road and left behind as Miranda took the infant with her to the village. From here, of course, Ethan wakes up confused and disoriented and proceeds to embark on his march of death. Now, if we are to believe Heisenberg in the story, then Miranda was fully aware of Ethan's nature and had intended to let him roam free in the village, unknown to Ethan himself, to clean up the rest of the mess while she moved on to bring her daughter back to life. Ethan, it seemed, was intended by Miranda to kill the lords serving beneath her and take their place as her lone enforcer. Ethan, of course, had no interest in going along with her psychotic plan and only had one goal in mind: to get his daughter back. That being said, Heisenberg certainly did not have as clear of a view of Miranda's goals as he may have thought. After his death, Miranda herself descends onto the wreckage of the battlefield and rips out Ethan Winters' heart in an effort to kill him. Much to her surprise, this would not be the end of Ethan Winters. Like a vulture, the Duke swooped in and gathered Ethan's body after Miranda's departure for the ceremony grounds. The Duke, in his seemingly all-knowing greatness, seriously, how does he know all this? Anyways, tells Ethan that he knew he would wake up, and that he has already begun taking him to confront Miranda. Miranda's story concludes, for now at least, on the receiving end of the Duke's arsenal in the hands of a half-dead and withering Ethan Winters. Although mutating multiple times to attempt to subdue him, all of her power came up short against the hailstorm of bullets and explosive ordnance gifted to her courtesy of Ethan, the angry father who would just not die. From here, who knows what long-lasting influence Miranda interactions will have on the world at large. The legacy of her experiments lives on in Rose. And of course, we have that very eyebrow-raising appearance of Ethan in the post-credits scene. What do you think? Will we hear from Miranda again? What about all her connections in this new Resident Evil canon at large? What will come of it all? Drop a comment down below, like this video if you enjoyed it, and until next time, cheers.